All right. So, uh, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to get folks familiar with the amphibian crossing guard training program that we have, go over some uh, ecological knowledge of this area, and talk about the Sourlands, identify amphibians, and then learn how we actually collect the data. Um, Information that you need to know if you are going to become a crossing guard, because some of you might listen to this talk and be like, you know what, that's not really for me. And some of you will be like, get me a rain jacket. I'm so excited. So let's go ahead and get in on it. So in New Jersey, a lot of folks, well, even in around New Jersey, a lot of folks don't know where the Sourlands is. And so if you look at this map, right in the middle of the state, a little bit above the middle line, you see this really dark patch there. And that, my friends, is the Sourlands. It is a total powerhouse for carbon sequestration, and that's where it's showing up on this graphic, but it stands out really prominently in the state. And what defines the Sourlands is the geology. And so if you look at this map, this shows the bedrock geology of the Sourlands. And that red line through it is Jurassic diabase. And that is really characteristic of the Sourlands, is that diabase. And it's a really slow, it really slows down filtration of water. So we get a lot of perch wetlands. So if you're looking at this map, kind of hold the previous map in your mind where that red diabase runs through, and project that onto this map. And you can see all these perch wetlands, which is the light blue areas on the map, go right along with that diabase is. And that's something that's really special about the Sourlands, and enables it to have a lot of wetlands, which these amphibians are using. So why are amphibians migrating in the first place? A lot of folks think of migration as happening on the African savanna, but animals all over the place migrate. Birds migrate, monarchs migrate, amphibians migrate. And for a lot of these organisms, the reason that they're migrating is for food resources, overwintering habitat, or for breeding. So our amphibians here are migrating to find their one true love, AKA make lots of babies. And they do this on the first warm, rainy night of the late winter, early spring. And when I say warm, I mean 50 degrees. And so usually end of February, beginning in March. Last year it was around March 15th that actually we had our big night. And you're really looking for these really wet downpour nights where the temperature is about 50 degrees or above. And these amphibians are migrating to vernal pools. So what is a vernal pool? Well, a vernal pool is a body of water that dries out entirely or almost entirely every year, and it does not support a fish population. And those are the two really defining characteristics of a vernal pool: a body of water that dries out or almost dries out and does not have a fish population. Vernal pools can be connected to each other hydraulically by water source, whether it's flooding, snow melt, in some cases even kind of underground springs. And these habitats are really, really vital, and they can be of all different sizes. And even really small vernal pools can be a home to thousands of individual amphibians. So this is just two examples of what vernal pools could look like. A vernal pool could be from a tree falling over and that rootstock coming up, and it leaves an indentation in the ground. Or on the right-hand side, that's me and my kids. And this was just a little depression in the ground. During the summertime, the heat of the summer, you might not even notice it. It probably doesn't have any water, but early in the spring with all that snow melt and the rain, it was full of wood frog eggs and spotted salamander eggs. So with that, now that we know a little bit about the Sourlands and what's special about it, when amphibians are migrating, where they're migrating to, let's meet our friends that are migrating. So this is a green frog. And green frogs, you will see them migrating, but they're not actually breeding right now, or in the early springtime. But I wanted to put it on here because sometimes they can be confused with American toads. So green frogs are about 2 to 3 inches in length. Some short shade of green, obviously green frog. And the underside of their belly is white to cream. And they have 2 little folds that start behind the back of their eyes and extend down. And this is a facultative species. And when I say facultative species, what I mean is that it can use vernal pools for breeding, but is not dependent on vernal pools for breeding. Most of the species I'm going to be talking about are facultative, but one of the species is an obligate species, and that means it must use vernal pools for breeding. Green frogs can also have 2 laying sessions a year. And so they tend to lay many, many eggs when they do lay. The next one up is American toad. And this picture was taken by Bruce Michael, who is one of our very experienced amphibian crossing guards. And so American toads are typically between 2 to 3.5 inches in length. They're usually brown, but they're not always brown. Sometimes they can be kind of grayish. They have 2 warts that are pretty large right behind their eyes. And the males are smaller than the females. They have a light stripe down the back, that extends down their back, and they are also a facultative species. And so green frogs and American toads are fairly large, especially compared to our spring peeper. So our American toads and green frogs are about 2.5, 3 inches. Sometimes I think they've definitely been bigger than that when I've seen them out. But spring peepers are 1 to 1.5 inch, so they can like sit right on your thumb. They're very, very small. And the back has a large X shape on it, and you can kind of see that in this picture here. And the top of the head has a dark bar that goes between the 2 eyes. But honestly, between a wood frog, a green frog, an American toad, this one is just so, so small. And for me, it's the spring peepers in the spring that let me know that this migration is going to be happening soon. It's the harbinger of spring. When that late winter starts to warm up just slightly and you can hear them peeping anytime you go by a wet area, it just gets me really, really excited. And I immediately start looking for my spring ephemerals. And spring peepers are also a facultative species. So this is our wood frog. And the wood frog is 1.5 to 3 inches. So it's kind of, in between the spring peeper and our American toad, but again, it looks completely different. The background color of the wood frog can really vary. Sometimes it's more greenish gray, sometimes it's more brown. One thing that really helps me identify what it is those little masks that kind of go right behind the eyes. And its skin is typically pretty smooth. The hind legs have crossbars on them. You can kind of see that in this picture. And the underside is white to cream colored, which a lot of the frogs are, but really going for that color patch behind the eyes and the crossbars on the leg. And wood frogs are a facultative species. And wood frogs are just super, super cool. So this is wood frogs in anaplexis. And I know the American toad picture, they were also in anaplexis. So wood frogs have external fertilization. So the female will lay eggs and the male will either release sperm at the same time or right after. So he is in the position to do that to make sure that her eggs are fertilized by his sperm. But another super cool thing about wood frogs is that they can freeze solid during the winter time. So at the beginning of the winter, ice will like fill in the frog's abdominal cavity and encase the internal organs. And ice crystals form between the layers of skin and the muscle, and the eyes will turn white because the lens will freeze. But at the same time, the wood frog's liver produces large amounts of glucose that flush into every cell of the body, and that syrupy solution prevents the cells from actually freezing and binds the water molecules inside to prevent dehydration. So it allows more of the external parts of the frog's body to form ice, but the internal of the cells and the organs have that glucose that prevents it from freezing solid. So it's just so exciting. And then they can thaw out and reanimate and go on and do their thing. So wood frogs, super cool. I really hope you see them. Another amphibian friend that you will probably see are eastern redback salamanders. And so with these ones, they're not actually going and laying their eggs in the vernal pools, but they are waking up at this time. So they do not have an aquatic larval stage. One of the ways to tell that these are eastern redback salamanders can be a little bit tricky because they might look like two different species, but they just have two different color phases. So there's one that's a lead phase and one that's a redback phase. It's this salamander that you're going to be seeing, and most likely the yellow spotted salamander. And you really won't confuse them. Every once in a while we see a two-line salamander that you might confuse with the eastern redback, but we really haven't seen the two-line salamander in a while, at least when I was looking through the data. So this is more likely the species that you're going to be seeing. And then this is kind of the one that everybody gets super excited about, and honestly, I cannot blame them. This is the yellow spotted salamander, and I really didn't put their length in there. They can easily get to be 8 inches long, maybe a little bit bigger. And the adult spotted salamander is dark brown to black with yellow or orange spots all over it. And this is the only species that we're going to be seeing that's a vernal pool obligate species. So it must lay its eggs in vernal pools. And unlike the frogs that have external fertilization, yellow spotted salamanders have internal fertilization, but not in the way that you might think. So yellow spotted salamanders, the males will lay or put out spermatophores, which kind of look almost like boogers on a stick, and the female will come and she'll take them and use them internally to fertilize her eggs and then lay her eggs. So it's just another interesting process. And so another big difference between the other species that we're looking at and yellow spotted salamanders is they lay fewer eggs. And the reason that being in a vernal pool is really important is because there's no fish in there. So when you have a frog lay eggs, they might lay 1,000 eggs at a time. And so if there's a fish in there and they eat those eggs, okay, well, there was 1,000, maybe the fish eat a couple hundred, not that big of a deal. But when you only lay 200 eggs, it's a lot more detrimental to them to have eggs being predated on by fish. So again, this is the only vernal pool obligate species, and they have different life adaptations as far as egg size and quantity of eggs per laying amount. So why do we even care about amphibians? Why are they important? Well, as with everything, ecosystems are super complex, and the interactions between different organisms and plants and how this whole system fits together is so complex. But we do know that amphibians control pests. They help build soil. They're a food source for other wildlife, and they communicate ecosystem health. So why do we even need amphibian crossing guards, right? These amphibians have been crossing for millennia without us. Well, they have been crossing for millennia without us. We are unfortunately the problem. So we are driving cars, and a lot of amphibians are killed due to rodent mortality, because you might have a vernal pool here, and they spend most of their summer over here. And so normally they would just cross over and go to their vernal pool to breed, but now there's a road here. And so one car going every 15 minutes can wipe up about 70% of the population. I mean, it is bonkers the amount of impact that we have just from driving cars through these migratory areas. Development is another huge issue for amphibians, because loss of habitat and pollution, because a lot of amphibians will absorb things through their skin. Their skins are very porous. So they're highly susceptible to poisoning and having birth defects due to pollution. And humans also spread diseases. So if you do come out to be an amphibian crossing guard, you may only go to one vernal pool each time. And that's because we can pick up different diseases on our boots and then walk and then take the disease from one vernal pool to the next vernal pool to the next vernal pool. So if you do go out, when you come back, you're going to need to just clean your boots really, really well if you're ever going to go and visit another pool within that week. So amphibian crossing guards are also really important to collect information on amphibian population size and changes, because we don't know what we don't know. So if you're not going out and collecting this data, there would be no way that we would understand how many amphibians were dying due to rodent mortality, or to changes in water quality due to, I don't know, a million ash trees dying. So, having this data that amphibian crossing guards are collecting is really, really important. So where are amphibians crossed? All along the Northeast. There are programs in University of Maine that are similar to ours, except just on an even bigger scale. So this is just a map showing where other crossings are happening. You can see there's a big cluster where we are up in the Northeast. So do we actually make a difference? So the average temperature for crossing in 2021 was about 49 degrees. Rain was moderate. The number of cars that went through our amphibian crossing guard roads was 251. And so the amount of salamanders that were successfully crossed was 631. And we only lost 4 to road mortality. Eastern redback salamanders, 6 were successfully crossed, 1 died. String peepers, 181, 15 died. Wood frogs successfully crossed 1,197. So, or 1,197, and only 42 passed away on the road. So it is a real impact. And one thing that I noticed by looking through the data was that our larger amphibians had a higher success rate with crossing than our smaller ones. And I think part of that is because it's easier to see, especially, remember, we are out at nighttime. As you can see in this picture, we're out at nighttime, it is raining, it is cold, and we're more likely to miss those little tiny spring peepers compared to missing, a big old dinosaur spotted salamander crossing the road. But I think this is something that's really, really important for amphibian crossing guards to keep in mind, that the little spring peepers are just as important as those big yellowed spotties. So I'm really encouraging our crossing guards for this year to really keep an eye out and try to make sure that you focus in on the details and not just go for the biggest thing that you see, but go for look for them all.
Does the light Is the light off-putting for them?
I'm not sure. They definitely they will definitely freeze if you shine right in their face. But generally, when we're walking and crossing, we try not to do that. We have flashlights out and a headlamp out to be able to look at the ground and watch where we're going and spot things that are crossing. But um, generally, if they are crossing on their own and there are no cars moving or no cars coming, you just let them cross. You don't want to go pick them up because they know where they're going, they know what they're doing, and you just let them go. One thing that I know is really hard for folks is that if there's a car coming and there's amphibians crossing, you want to stop that car to let the amphibians cross, and we are not legally allowed to do that um, as per the town's ordinances, that we cannot impede traffic in any way. And it is not worth your life or somebody else's life to save a salamander, unfortunately. So, we do the best that we can when we go out, and we try to move as many amphibians across the street. If there is a car, we usually have a whole line of guards that are out, and somebody at the end says car, and that goes down each person down the line. Everybody tries to move all the amphibians off the road. But once that car starts coming close, you have to step aside. And it really stinks, but we have to make sure everybody stays safe. So you're hooked and you want to become an amphibian crossing guard. What do you need to do? Well, what you're doing right now, being in the amphibian crossing guard training program. So learning why the amphibians are crossing, who's crossing, and the safety that goes along with it. You need to be committed to stay out for 2.5 hours in the cold rain, which I know deters a lot of people. But if you only come out for an hour and then you leave, you just potentially drove over a bunch of amphibians to get there and then drove over all those amphibians to get back. So we really encourage people to be out for 2.5 hours. And the reason we go out between 6:30 and 9 is because the amphibians start crossing when it's dark out, and that just so happens to be during rush hour. And so we feel like that's when we're going to have the biggest impact.
Are we only coming out for one night?
Potentially. Sometimes last year there was one big night and then 2 smaller nights. Generally, most of the amphibians will cross on that one big night, but then they'll start crossing back to their summer homes after they're done breeding. So they're going to have another wave coming back across the road, but it's more staggered versus that first big night of the spring. They all go in a flood, and it is incredible to see. Last year, I've been an amphibian crossing guard for 3 years. It's going to be my 4th. The first 2 years, I saw nada. I went out. My captain would call me out. I would go out, and then I just wouldn't see any, or we'd see a couple of wood frogs. But last year, I don't know if it was just because it was so late in the season that it happened. It was around March 15th. But it was like a flood of amphibians. I've never seen anything like it in my entire life. It was just absolutely amazing. I personally saw over 300 or 400 amphibians in that 2.5 hour time period. It's amazing. But you're not necessarily guaranteed to see them just because you went out on a night that's raining. So the equipment that you need, you're going to need rain gear, a jacket, rain jacket, rain pants, boots, and a hat. You need to make sure that these clothes are really warm, or that they're big enough that you can put clothes on underneath it, because it does get really, really cold. You're going to need a headlamp and a flashlight and a reflective vest. So the Conservancy has some of this gear, not rain gear, but we have some headlights and flashlights and some reflective vests, but we don't have enough for everyone. So I'm really encouraging everyone to buy your own. And then for people that are not able to buy their own, then they can borrow them from us. Um, so how do you cross amphibians and collect this data? So everybody that goes out is going to be provided with clipboards and data sheets. And these are right in the rain data sheets. So they're it's okay for them to get wet, and you use a pencil to write on them. You have a captain that is going to be leading your road, and your captains are really experienced crossing guards. A lot of them have been doing it for a lot longer than I have been doing it. And so when you get out there, you're going to write the date, the time, the temperature for that area. So you need to use one of the closest weather stations possible. You're going to write down how hard it's raining. And then you're going to go out and you're going to walk the road and look for any DORs, dead on roads. And you're going to remove them from the area that you are monitoring. And then your captain will tell you that this is the start time. And then so for the next hour, you are going to count the number of cars that drive through, and then count the number of species that come through for each individual species that successfully cross and that are DORs. If a car goes through and an amphibian gets hit, you write that down, and then you remove the amphibian off of the road. And this is really important so that you don't double count it. And it's really icky. I understand that moving it, but it's really important as far as being consistent with your data. At the end of that hour, you again recheck your temperature, you're going to recheck your rainfall, and you restart counting cars. At the end of the night, your captain is going to be responsible for collecting all of those data sheets. And then this data is going to be entered through a Google form. And your captain will be responsible for doing that. At some sites, we have one person writes data and the other person is running around moving amphibians, because it can get really overwhelming doing both by yourself, especially when the amphibians are really just flooding the road. So it depends on the road and how many amphibians are out, but your captain will be able to tell you the protocol for that night, and at that particular location. So how do you prepare for a big night to stay safe? First, anybody that wants to be an amphibian crossing guard, after watching this, learning about what you're going to be doing, you need to fill out the volunteer crossing guard form, and Karina's going to drop it in the chat at the end of the presentation before we go on to questions, so you can just go ahead and sign up. And I use this because some people watch this presentation, they're like, no way, I don't want anything to do with this. That's fine. You can save amphibians also by staying in your home because you're not driving. Great for you, honestly. So go ahead. But if you do want to be amphibian crossing guard, also awesome. And Karina will send you the link. You must also sign a waiver every night that you go out. This waiver has a COVID component to it just to make sure everybody stays safe. And that you also go through the checklist of what you need to be doing to be safe while you're out. We also have a safety and ID quiz, and that is only done once. But again, it makes sure that you understand the ways to be safe while being an amphibian crossing guard, and checks your ability to ID these amphibians, because it can get a little tricky when you're out there in the middle of the night in the rain. You're gonna need your safety gear, your rain gear, and you're not allowed to go out alone. So your road captain's gonna let you know if people are going to be going out. Everybody's going to be assigned to different crossings, and I'm going to use where you live as the basis for what crossing you're going to be working at or volunteering at. But you cannot go out if nobody else is going out. It is not safe. You always need to be aware of your surroundings. You are not allowed to wear headphones or AirPods. While you're doing this, you have to have all of your senses with you, especially because of cars. Always be alert to others and to cars. And again, never run out in front of a car to try to save an amphibian, because you're going to save a lot more amphibians if you didn't get hit by the car. So these are my frequently asked questions. When are you going to know when to go out? your road captains are going to let you know. They have direct communication with me. And then they're going to alert their team. And Juanita, who I know is on this call, she has an Oracle pool, and it's been really great at predicting when we're going to have a crossing. So Juanita's Oracle pool and your captains. That's how we're going to know when we're going to go out. Crossing guards are expected to stay out from 6:30 to 9 p.m., but some of this depends on your captain. Some sites start a little bit earlier than others, just depending on road traffic. So again, once you're assigned, your captain's going to be the one that's really communicating back and forth with you. If while you're out and the rain stops for at least 45 minutes or becomes that the conditions get really dry, captains can dismiss guards early. But again, I really let it up be to the captain's decision, because they know their sites really, really well. Some of them have been doing this for a decade. They know what they're doing, and I really trust them. If conditions become dangerous, such as high winds or lightning, guards are going to be required to leave. We're not going to put anybody in danger because of weather conditions. So, you know, the amphibians will still cross even without us, but we need to keep everybody safe. And another thing of contention sometimes is tourists, which are people that just come out to see the amphibians, and sometimes they pick them up inappropriately in a way that is not safe. And the safe way to pick up an amphibian is with two hands like this, because if they fall out of your hands, they can get really hurt. So two hands gently and moving your amphibians. So if you do have people come out and they're just out to see the amphibians, please don't yell at them or get frustrated with them. You know, they really want to be out there because they want to learn. And I think that this is a great opportunity to draw them in, to educate them, and include them in the crossing. So try to teach them the proper way to pick up an amphibian if they are. And if they start moving them in the wrong direction, so if an amphibian is crossing the street this way, don't, you know, and everybody else is going that way, don't turn them around and try to get them to go the other way, because they might have already bred and they're going back to their other location. And even if you try to turn them around, they're just going to turn around themselves and go back in the direction they were heading. So again, sharing this information with anybody that comes that hasn't been trained, just do some on-the-spot training with them and make sure that they're being safe, and make sure that they're, you know, doing this in the best way possible. So if you don't want to go out, or if you do want to go out and you still want to do other things to support amphibians, one of the big things you can do is stop using fertilizer and pesticides on your lawn. A lot of those chemicals are not readily absorbed into the soil, and a lot of times people put too much on. So when it rains, all those chemicals run off your lawn and into vernal pools and into other water bodies, and they pollute the water. So stop using fertilizers and pesticides, and plant more native plants. I think I say this any chance I get. Supporting our insect populations is supporting our amphibian populations. And these amphibians are eating insects, they're eating, you know, aquatic insects, and also non-aquatic insects when they're out on land. And so a lot of these insect populations have host plants that they have to be able to go through their larval stage. And so we need to make sure that they have the food resources that they need. You can also attend local town meetings and oppose ordinances and variances to build on wetlands and fill in vernal pools. Okay, so we are at the question time, and I see that there are questions. But before I start answering questions, Karina, could you please drop in the link for the volunteer amphibian crossing guard form?
Yep, I just sent that, and I see people have already responded, so thank you.
Awesome, awesome. So with that, did you put the questions in Slack?
They're in the chat.
They're in the chat, okay.
Oh,
that's everybody signing up. That's I was like, I have 31, so 31 people must have already just filled out that form. Oh my goodness, that was fast. you all.
Carolyn, can you talk a little bit about how people will be notified of when you guys are going out? What advance notice can you give to people?
Absolutely. So usually we start watching the weather mid-February. So it's February. Oh my God, I can't even believe it. So right around now, we're going to start watching the temperature. And again, we're looking for temperatures above 40, between 40 and 50 degrees, and rainfall, and not like a little bit of sprinkling, but some real, substantial rain. So we're going to be keeping an eye out on it, and our captains will let you know. They'll send out an email to their team saying, hey, we think we're going to have a crossing on Wednesday night. Who is available? Then you, as the volunteer, will respond to your captain saying, I can come or I cannot come. Once we have a tally, we know that there's going to be more than one person able to go out. Then we'll say, okay, we're going to keep this road open for this night. And then the day of, we will make the final call of yes, we're going to be going out. So usually expect that around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Say yes, for sure. We're going out tonight. Meet at X location at 6 o'clock. And then you just go out. So some of the captains use it by cell phone. Some of the captains do it by email. So you're going to just have to let your captain know which way you want to receive these messages. But usually a few days ahead of time is the warning, and then the day of is the confirmation.
Thank you. And I think maybe a step back before that, what's the process from this webinar, people signing up? What happens next? Like, do they get assigned to captains? What's the process?
Yep. So once you sign up, I'm going to use your address to assign you to a location, because I don't want, say if you live in Hillsborough, I'm going to assign you to a location that's near Hillsborough rather than assign you something over in Lambertville, because I don't want you driving across all those other potential crossing locations to get to that site. So I'm going to try to minimize where everybody is coming from and get you to the closest crossing site. We have about 7 or 8 crossing sites right now. We're looking to expand it. So that's a hope for this year, that we can add more sites to our list. But I use that Google form to know where you are and assign you.
Question?
Yes.
I heard that you shouldn't use any creams on your hands for like the day or two before, because that the amphibians can absorb that out of your skin. Is that true? And do we need to worry about that?
So I don't know about a few days before. I would say definitely the day of. Before you go out, wash your hands really well with unscented soap, and just make sure you don't have any hand sanitizer or any creams on your hand. That's a really good point, because like I said earlier, that amphibians absorb things through their skin, that you could accidentally poison them by doing that. So thank you for bringing that up.
Another quick question.
Sure.
Can some of us, is there a way to like park in a spot that's maybe a few roads away from where the crossings happen, and then walk a couple blocks to avoid putting them at risk?
So at these locations, we know where they're crossing. And so your captains will give you the GPS points and tell you where to park. So at one of our locations, if you come in from one side, you're going to go right through the crossing. But if you go around the far way, which adds about 5 to 10 minutes onto your drive, you don't go through any crossings. So that's how we, again, assign people. And then their captain will let them know, don't drive through this way, use the other road to get there, because then you don't drive through the crossing.
Great. And then one quick one more. So two of us, a friend of mine, we're on the call together and we live across the street from each other. So can we get on the same team so that we can carpool hopefully, and then, reduce one car when we go?
Yeah. You can also send me an email and just let me know, because sometimes some sites will have 30 people assigned to it and some only have 10, so I can try to put you on the same, because I also don't want to have 30 people on one side and then everybody decides to go out, and then it's just too many people. There's not enough room for anybody to park. But if you put that note in, I will know. And it's better if you two can carpool, because then again, fewer cars on the road.
And that would be to that stewards@sourland.org email.
Yep.
Great, thank you.
I have a question. I don't know if you guys can hear me.
Yes.
Yes, great. I'm in Princeton, not so near the Sourlands, but there are vernal pools near me, and salamanders cross. And in fact, they laid some eggs in our pool.
Nice.
And I don't know if you guys do any crossings out that far, or if they're all around the Sourlands, or if you know anybody who does by us.
So we only do in the Sourlands because we're restricted by that imaginary border that goes around the Sourlands. But you can always reach out to your local, environmental organizations, or, you might have some other local groups that might be doing crossings. And if not, you could always try to start one yourself. The state does have, works with Conserve Wildlife, and they do a lot of amphibian crossing guard programs as well. So they're another great resource to reach out to them if you want to start your own program.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I know Steve Hiltner. Thanks, Fairfax.
I'm scrolling through to find any more questions, but if somebody has one while I'm scrolling through, just go ahead and shout it out.
There was a question if you can use gloves, or would they also be harmful because of the chemicals on them?
I don't know for sure. I would think that using one of those non-latex, non-powder gloves might be okay, as long as there's no powders or chemicals on it. But I think most folks just use their bare hands. Just wash your hands, make sure there's no hand sanitizer, lotions, or anything like that. And they just use their hands. But honestly, you don't have to pick them up. You can just let them cross on their own. And only if you see, if you hear down the line that a car is coming, then you would move them. But in general, it's better just to let them move on their own rather than picking them up and disturbing them.
Carolyn, a question?
Sure.
This is Mary Wood. How do we get to that volunteer crossing guard form to fill it out?
Okay.
I have the same question. I haven't been able to connect.
I'll repost it in the chat right now, but we'll also provide, we can send an email out tomorrow.
Oh, you'll send it out?
We can,
okay.
yeah, and I'll also put it in the chat right now.
Thank you.
How do you get it then? She said she was posting it again tomorrow. I can probably.
Yeah, it's in the, she just posted it in the chat. So you should be able to see it like a Google form link. And if not, we'll send out a follow-up email with it as well. So Anita was talking about her sign, which is a great thing that she had made. It looks just like one of those road signs that that are candidates that put out. And she put stickers of amphibians on there and wrote amphibian crossing. We have traffic cones that we put out at our crossing areas, but again, we're not allowed to stop traffic in any way. So we have these traffic cones kind of on the side to help delineate the different zones. At least on the road that I usually work on, we have 6 zones and 1 or 2 guards is responsible for each zone. Some of the smaller ones, some of the smaller crossings might only have 1 or 2 zones. And so they don't need as many traffic cones, but I love those signs because the more that we can let people know what's going on, the better. So how many hours in advance? So that question I answered. So usually a few days in advance, we let you know that potentially we're going to have a crossing, and then the day of we confirm.
And there's also a question, in your experience, have people usually slowed down when they see you guys are out?
Sometimes. Sometimes. There's one particular car in the past 3 years that I've been on this road that I don't know what they're doing, but it's a big old truck that flies. Like when they see us, I swear they drive faster. And I'll be, we'll be out for 3 hours and they'll go by 6 or 8 times. It's the same truck. So I don't know why, but a lot of people slow down and they want to know what's going on and they're very curious, but I wouldn't bank on everybody slowing down. Any other questions?
Where do we find the quiz and the waiver?
Once you send me that information in that Google form, I will send it back out with all that, with the waiver and with the quiz. And the quiz is kind of silly, but I just want to make sure everybody is on board with knowing the safety procedures and how to identify the different organisms. But I will send that out because I don't want to spam everybody with things if they're not actually going to want to come out and participate.
Good. And can people who aren't on this call volunteer?
Unmuted myself.
Can volunteer. So
If they're not on this call, but they watch the video and fill in the form and the waiver and everything, can they get on the list too, or just for people who are here tonight?
So I will have to talk to Lori about that. In the past, before COVID, only people that attended the training were allowed to go out that year. And during COVID, we only used veteran guards that already knew what was going on. So I will find out and I'll let you know, but generally we want to be able to make sure that we're really connecting with people that want to go out just to make sure everybody stays safe.
And I'll also add to that, because there's a question, if we do social media, when the guards are out and people are out on the roads and we think they're crossing, we will be posting on social media, telling people to do things like, instead of going out for dinner, make a meal in, stay off the roads. So that kind of stuff will go on in the background. And if you're unable to make it that night, even just sharing that kind of helps spread the word as well and awareness of it.
Is there any other questions that I can answer for folks?
Somebody asked in the chat if you ever distribute pamphlets to nearby homes. Have you ever done that?
We talked about that, but we haven't actually done it. So some, at least on the road that I work on, some of the homeowners come out and they just participate with us. But we haven't. And I think that's a great idea. I think it'll help build more connection with the landowners and also sharing with them about not using pesticides on their lawn. I think it's a great thing to do. We just have not done that yet.
Sure. Okay, you can't do everything. I asked a question earlier in the chat and someone kind of answered me, but is it ever ambiguous to know which way an amphibian's going? Like if you're not sure, you just kind of step back and watch it. And
yeah. So again, if there's no immediate danger to them, just let them be. And I mean, some of them I've seen crossing in the direction opposite of everybody else. And that to me just says they got there early, they're done, they're going home, or potentially that their natal vernal pool is on the other side of the road. Mm-hmm. So kind of when I showed that map of all the different locations, all the wetlands in the Sourlands, you saw all those like blue spots everywhere. All of those are potential vernal pools or ponds, bodies of water. And so you might have a road here this way, and then you have a vernal pool here and here and here and here. And so the amphibian might stay here during the summer, but this is their natal pool. So they'll pass these two vernal pools and go to this one. Or potentially they're over here and then they're going to that one. So you never really know where they're going. So I would just let them be. And if there's a car coming and you can move it, take your best guess.
I see. And so similarly, if it's like going along the side of the road, kind of paralleling the road, just try to watch it. And then if a car's coming, maybe try to protect it in that moment. Yeah.
Yeah. And if a car comes, try to step to the side of the road as best you can. I usually like to find my rock that I step on, because a lot of these amphibians will be in the leaf litter on the side of the road. Oh. So when you step off, you might accidentally step on. So when I get there and I'm kind of getting myself situated, I find a rock, because there's lots of rocks in the Sourlands, and that's my safety spot when cars come, and I just, move over and I always stand on that rock to the side.
And can you just say one more time about like how much warning we might get about when we're needed to go out, and then our captain will be the one to let us know?
Yep. So usually I would say 2 or 3 days in advance, we'll keep watching the weather and say, hey, if this is on Monday, hey, Wednesday, it looks like it might be good conditions, be on the alert. And then Juanita will let us know what her oracle pool looks like. And if there's frog spawn in there, and the weather's staying steady, that yes, it looks like it's going to be raining at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, we'll say, okay, tonight, we're going to be going out. So usually you get a few days ahead of time and then a confirmation that day that yes, in fact, we are going out.
And you mentioned, oh, I'm sorry.
Sometimes you might go out and at my site it's raining, but at yours it's dry. And that happens sometimes, especially with the mountain. So, being in that communication with your captain is just really critical.
And just really quick, I know I've asked a lot of questions, but so Juanita was posting earlier about making a sign, and you mentioned Juanita, that reminded me. So when she put her email in there that we could ask her for tips. But for actually posting the sign, it basically be like stuck that in a cone.
Mm-hmm. Juanita, do you put yours in a cone?
Well, I put one in each direction, obviously, because traffic comes from both directions. In one case, I have permission from the owner of the property. They own quite a large property there, so we park in their driveway, and I post a sign there just down from where we parked. And then the other side, I also post on that same property, which is, I believe it's like a green space, so it's not owned by anyone. You have to be careful. If you do want to post on somebody's property, ask them first. That would be the polite thing to do. But it's visible from cars coming in both directions, and it really slows things down tremendously, because people, first of all, can see you out there on the road with all those, reflective things, and they also now know why you're out on the road, and they will slow down in most cases.
But you've just stuck yours in the ground.
Just in the ground. It's plastic boards. I tried to post my photo in the chat here, but it just won't go. But it's a plastic board about, I guess maybe 3 feet by 2 feet or something, maybe a little bit smaller, on a metal frame. You can get it at a place like Staples. You can get them in boxes of 10. I did have a bunch more, but I gave some of them to the Sourland Conservancy, just the signs without anything on it. So I don't know where those went, but they might be hanging out in the offices somewhere if somebody wanted to look for them. But you can probably find them at Staples, and then just get some reflective letters also. Make about 2.5, 3 inches high. That's say Amphibian crossing ahead. And if you do email me, I'll send you my 2 pictures that I use. One is of a salamander, one is of a wood frog, and you can just use some packaging tape or plastic tape of some sort to tape those to the board so people know what amphibians are. Believe it or not, some people don't know what an amphibian is, so they're going to know it's a frog and a salamander. And it's a great way to get people. A lot of people will stop and ask you about it and be all thrilled and thank you for doing it and everything like that. It's a good educational opportunity too.
Thank you.
Thanks, Juanita. Any other questions or concerns that I can try to answer? Or we can just chat?
There was a question on gear. Is there any recommendations on where people should be getting them?
So I got some of my gear online from Amazon, some of it from REI. Dick's Sporting Goods also has good gear. So my rain pants, I think, are from Eddie Bauer. Same thing with my rain jacket, and reflective vest was from Amazon. So, and then headlamp, REI. So there's, a bunch of different ways to go. But I would check out, a couple different options, because the prices range vastly depending on where you're getting your equipment from. Juanita, do you know what lumens you should use as far as headlamps? I remember Alex had saying a certain lumen, but I can't remember.
I get the brightest ones you can find that don't cost too much. You should be able to get something decent for maybe $25 or $30. And many of them come with 2 options, a low and a high beam. So most of the time the low beam will work. I usually use them in conjunction with the flashlight, but if you have to put the flashlight down to pick something up, then it's nice to still have some light. So I would definitely recommend headlamps.
Yeah,
Can't
I
give
would
you
say,
exact
yeah,
number.
if you can only buy one, buy a headlamp, because also if you're holding your clipboard and a piece of paper and a flashlight, I mean, it's a lot. Or if you are at a site, because there was a lot of folks here, so hopefully we'll have a bigger volunteer base this year that people can switch off of who's writing and who's physically
Yeah,
crossing.
it makes sense to have one person sort of accumulating. You could have one person who's kind of a runner going up and down, collecting people's sightings so that everybody else can keep their eyes on the road.
Yeah,
For
because when it
cars and for
floods, it
amphibians.
floods.
Yeah,
As
right.
I mean, amphibians like flooding the road.
Yes, every
It
so
gets so
often you get a
stronger.
big rush.
Yes.
And yeah, it's all hands on on deck.
So I don't say what the location roads are during the presentation, just to try to limit tourists as much as I can. But if you sign up, I will assign you and we can talk about other locations if for some reason that location doesn't work for you. But just trying as much as I can to keep that information to a minimal until I know people are going to go out. Any other questions? Yeah.
Wanted to make a comment. Last year we found at the Stony Brook North that the red light actually doesn't bother them and distract them as much as like the bright light. When we had a lot of salamanders on the road, just switching our headlamps or whatever lights we had to red, they were still, you know, like moving and they weren't freezing. So if you can find a light or a headlamp that's red, we found that worked well.
Yeah,
Awesome.
that's true. A lot of them do come with the red option as well. If you can see well enough with that, where we are, for example, it's extremely dark. There's no light at all, no street lights or anything. So that might not be bright enough for the people. But yeah, they will definitely, you know, they may not be able to see red light is probably what it is.
Thank you for sharing. Any other, do we wear masks? So last year we had guards wear masks. This year we're not asking them to wear masks. If you want to wear a mask, that is 100% okay. But we're not requiring all of our volunteers to wear masks this year. Okay. I think that's all the questions from the chat. Is there any last questions? I don't like anybody leaving. I mean, you can always email me and just say, I had another question. But anything else that's on your mind that you want to, well, amphibian related, that you would like to ask before I get off? No. All right. Well, then with that, thank you all so much for coming. Make sure you fill out that Google form. Let me know that you're going to come. And I look forward to Big Night 2022. Hopefully be as big as last year, because that was really exciting.
Last year.
All right. Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you.